What's up, YouTube? This is Too Raw for TV. All right, so before I get into the video, I want to give a shout out to two of my subscribers for contributing to the channel. I want to give a big shout out to Percy for his big donation to the channel. Thank you a lot, brother, for your support. And as far as the documentaries are concerned, um, as far as like talking about, you know, assassinations or whatever, I will be, I will continue doing that. Um, Some of them I'll put on the Patreon. Some of them I'll put on YouTube. I am aware that YouTube has stiffer guidelines for certain things, but I look at it like this though. At the end of the day, I've been following pretty much YouTube's guidelines to a T, and they still take measures to suppress my channel and my views and my success on here. So it doesn't really matter what I do. So I will be putting some of that stuff on YouTube. And I also want to give a big shout out to Lamont for his contribution to the channel as well. I'm glad you guys liked that documentary that I did. Um, and like I said, I will continue to do more. I have an idea about talking about Watergate again, but talking about more from the angle of why I believe that it's possible. I can't say for certain. There's a lot of evidence to suggest that Richard Nixon might have been set up. There might have been a setup by the CIA. And ironically, some of the Operation 40 individuals that he that he supervised to try to take out Castro. You know what I'm saying? But shifting gears into a topic less serious, I want to talk about the top 10 shooting guards. Okay, so it's been a while since I did this. At number 6, I had Allen Iverson. I saw one person, he kind of guessed what my final 5 would be. You're very close. Put like that, you're very close. After a while, it's kind of easy to see who's left on the table. Okay, so at number 5, I have Clyde Drexler. According to my memory, I think he's dropped a little bit, just one slot. Last time I had him number 4, but I think a particular player has done enough since then to supplant him at number 4. But still, Drexler, I have number 5. Now, the thing about Clyde Drexler is part of it's because he played his entire prime in the Western Conference. So basically, if you were a star in the West for most of the 80s, you took a back seat to Magic Johnson and the Showtime Lakers. You just That's just how it was. Um, and also, he was in the shadow. As magnificent as Clyde Drexler was, he was in the shadows of Michael Jordan. Um, but let's not get it twisted. Clyde Drexler is one of the greatest shooting guards in the history of this league. He was a great scorer, but he wasn't a selfish scorer. He was a team player. He could have scored more if he wanted to, but you know he was not a guy that consciously went out there and took 25, 30 shots a game. That wasn't really how he flowed. He was more of a team player. To be quite honest with you, if you really watch Clyde Drexler play in today's NBA, I think he would be seen as more of a all-around player. First of all, this has to be said about him. Now, when he was a younger individual, he grew up in Louisiana. Well, he was born in Louisiana, but he grew up in Houston, Texas. He was uh, an athletic kid, obviously, but he played 2 sports, as was normal back then. You know, as a matter of fact, in Clyde's generation, it was actually kind of more prominent to be into baseball. Baseball, probably until the 70s, was probably the number one national pastime in this country, even when it pertained to black kids. So baseball was still probably number one until about the 1970s. Then it shifted to football and basketball. But Clyde played baseball. He was initially better at baseball than he was at basketball. But eventually, he made his high school varsity team, and he actually played the center position in high school. And I think he averaged something crazy like 27 points and 20 rebounds or something as a center in high school. And that makes a lot of sense because statistically, Clyde Drexler is the greatest offensive rebounding shooting guard in NBA history. He was a great rebounder for his position, but he was exceptionally good at offensive rebounding. And he has the highest offensive rebounding rate of any shooting guard in history. It's phenomenal, actually. He routinely had seasons where he averaged well over 7 rebounds per game. Okay, that's a backcourt guy in an era where you had real centers, not just camping out from the 3-point line. So, but if you think about Clyde Drexler, you think about him and Hakeem Olajuwon, then named Hakeem Olajuwon, playing at Houston College initially, and they called themselves Phi. I think it was Phi. What was it? Phi Slamma Jamma. I think it was called Phi Slamma Jamma. They was known for just being athletic as fuck. You know what I'm saying? I mean, that was Clyde when he still had that fro before Father Time took it away and made it that baby hair cradle cap that he wore, that he rocked before. You know what I'm talking about? You know how like you have a baby and you keep the cradle cap on, you take it off and it's all matted down and sparse. That's how Clyde's shit was before he shaved it off. But yeah, back when he was in high school and college, so he had rocked the fro, and he was known for graceful dunking. Don't get me wrong, he could be powerful, but he was more graceful in the air. You know, almost like he was gliding. That's where he got that nickname from. At that time, Akeem Olajuwon was more of a power player too. Um, I believe it was also before Akeem Olajuwon really became religious. Now, I believe he converted to Islam all the way back then, perhaps, but he wasn't like a real true believer, like like he really practiced it. But anyway, for 2 straight years, they were a dominant college team. They never won the championship, but they made it to the Final Four twice. And I believe their last year together in '82, or was no '83, '83, they made it to the championship game, but that's when they famously lost to North Carolina State, which was coached by the late great Jim Valvano. That's one of the last at the end, it said Wittenberg, and he threw up the three. And oh man, I can't think of what was his name, man? He passed like 9 years ago. Johnson. Oh man, what's his name? He grabbed the miss and put it back before the buzzer. I can't think of his name. I think it was something Johnson. Um, but that's the closest he got to a collegiate championship. In '83, Clyde Drexler was drafted by Portland. And Clyde did that initially just come into the league and dominate. You know what I mean? Um, at that time, the Portland roster, I think their team consisted of Calvin Nat, Jim Paxson, who was the more talented brother of the more famous or more well-known John Paxson. But Jim Paxson was a better player. Jim was a shooting guard. And also on that team was Michael Thompson, who later would be featured with the Lakers. But that was that version, that was that Portland team. And Clyde sort of, played backseat. Now, his second year, Drexler averaged 17 points. And he was getting more playing time, and he was, I think, then fully into the starting lineup. In his third season, Clyde Drexler made his first All Star team while averaging 18.5 points, 5.6 rebounds, 8 assists, and 2.6 steals. And if I haven't, I think I've said this already. You hear those numbers? Now imagine him playing today with the inflated, with the increased pace and the inflated scoring, more possessions. That's why I say in today's NBA, he would be more of a triple double threat. I could just tell he was a great rebounding guard. In the right offense, he could average, and if his role was similar to something like a Russell Westbrook or something, but a much smarter player. Don't get me wrong, I love Russ, but I could see him putting up numbers similar to that. Like maybe not averaging exactly a triple double, but I could see Clyde with talent around him averaging 20 points, 9.5 rebounds, 9.5 assists. I could literally see him doing that. By this time, I think Denver had made the trade with Kiki Vanderway going from Denver to Portland, and they had a good squad there. But eventually, Clyde was beginning to emerge as the leader of that team. Okay, even if he didn't quite lead that team in scoring, like I say, he was a team player, but he was emerging as the best player on that team and the leader of that team. Throughout the late 1980s, the faces began to change with Portland. Lower in the rotation was the Jim Paxsons. Out was what's his face? Michael Thompson to the Lakers. In comes Terry Porter. In comes Jerome Kersey. In comes the may he rest in peace. In comes the late great Cliff Robinson. And now we're seeing that great Portland team, that loaded Portland team. That when you look at that roster, you think to yourself, how they didn't win a title with that team. There was so much talent on that team. But they went against the bad boy Pistons and then the Michael Jordan peak, Pippen peak Chicago Bulls teams. In 1989, 1990, Drexler led the Portland Trailblazers to the NBA Finals. It was their first Finals appearance in 13 years. That year, he averaged 26.4 points and 7.8 rebounds. Remember, he was a guard, but his team lost in 5 games. In the 1990-91 season, uh, Clyde Drexler led Portland to what was then a franchise record 63 games, but they were upsetted by Magic Johnson and his Lakers team in the Western Conference Finals. That's the team that went on to play the Bulls in '91, which was Magic's last meaningful games. I mean, yeah, he did come back in '95, '96, but you know what I mean. That was Magic Johnson's last meaningful games in the NBA. Well, I can't say that because they went to the playoffs in '96, so I can't say that. I think they played Houston in the first round and lost, so I can't say that. I can't really say it was his last meaningful game, but his last championship round game. 1991-92 season, Clyde Drexler made the All-NBA first team, and he finished second to Michael Jordan in MVP voting. That was probably Drexler at his peak. Okay, that was Drexler at his peak. I believe during that season in the latter stages, I can't remember what month. That's when Drexler suffered that knee injury, and ultimately Drexler lost. He never was the same after that. That severe knee injury. He became more of a. He went from being a superstar player. He lost some of his explosiveness, and he became more of a complementary piece, more like of a. He eventually diminished to become more like a Scottie Pippen like type guy, but he still was a good player, very good player. Ultimately, that year the Bulls beat Portland in 6. And then after that, you saw a gradual diminishing of that team. You know what I'm saying? That's when you saw the rise of the Sonics. Uh, Charles Barkley came over to trade with the Suns. They became a force. Utah was always a perennial team in the mix. Houston was a force. So Portland kind of fell to the wayside a little bit. Still was a pretty good team, but you know what I'm saying? They were no longer contenders. By the mid 1990s, Drexler was frustrated. He was on the bad side of, or the downside of 30 and the downside of his career, and he requested a trade. Now, a beautiful situation arose in that the Houston Rockets, who had won a championship in 94, in 94, 95, kind of fell flat. Okay? For whatever reason, their quest for a second championship wasn't going very well during the season. They were not performing as well. Uh, Drexler wanted to be traded to a contender. Remember, Drexler had ties with Hakeem Olajuwon all the way back to Houston when they played in college together with Phi Slamma Jamma. So Drexler was traded to the Houston Rockets. I think it was midway during that season. He helped to push that team to their from their doldrums. He pushed that team, he injected life into that team because he was desperately needed a secondary go-to guy, and he helped to catapult that team to do what they did during the end of that regular season and into the playoffs. And they still remain the lowest tiered team to ever win an NBA championship, a six seed. And what they did that postseason was remarkable. It was one of the greatest things I've ever seen in my life. How they consistently beat 50 and 60 win teams with relative ease uh, at times. Ultimately winning the title by sweeping the Orlando Magic. Now in '96, they were unable to three-peat, losing to, I believe, the Seattle Supersonics in the second round. After that season, of course, Clyde Drexler, Hakeem Olajuwon, that team acquired Charles Barkley. Now, had that had been 5 years earlier, or even 3 years earlier, I think that team would have won the championship. But by then, Olajuwon was showing some signs of age. Drexler was not what he once was. This is when Drexler was now kind of primarily becoming a jump shooter. I remember that. He was just shooting threes and mid-range jumpers. Occasionally he would take it to the basket, but he was more of just a jump shooter. And that translated to his field goal percentage. In his prime, Drexler was close to 50% shooting. By then, because of his shot selection, it was down more to 42, 43%. That's not bad, though, if you're a jump shooter. And Charles Barkley was getting fatter and slower. Still was putting up good and great numbers, still putting up like 16 points, 12, 11 rebounds. In fact, his first year with Phoenix, I believe he was second in the league in rebounding behind Dennis Rodman. And he had his highest rebounding average for a season since the year that he led the league in rebounding in 86, 87, when Barkley was the shortest person ever to lead the league in rebounding. In fact, in Barkley's first game with the Houston Rockets, he pulled down 33 rebounds, and I want to say it came against his former team, but I'm not certain about that. But back to Clyde Drexler. By 1997-98, which was his final year, Clyde Drexler was kind of finished as a player. Okay, and he announced before the season began that it would be his final year in the NBA. And to me, the 97-98 season, I know I might seem a little bit ancient saying this, but in my opinion, that was the end of an era. That was the last year that the headlines was dominated by that generation. The Michael Jordans, the Clyde Drexlers, the Stocktons, the Malones, uh, Elijah ones I haven't said them yet, uh, the Ewings, the Reggie Millers. That's the last time the headlines in the NBA was completely dominated by them, as I called it, the old men of the NBA. Starting in the abbreviated 98-99 season, that's when the youngsters started taking over, which I resented at the time. But then that just, now I look at it as a good old days because that incorporated the new generation, the Allen Iversons, the Chris Webbers. Uh, Morning was still there, but Morning was a tweener. Morning was older than the newer guys, but younger than the old guys. So, and now we have another generation of players. So you have to just adjust to what's out there. But Clyde Drexler retired after the 97-98 season. Houston would be in the playoffs, but it no longer was a championship team. In 97, they got to the Western Conference Finals, but John Stockton knocked them out with that three-pointer. And I think it was Game 6 of that series. They came back from a 90-77 deficit in the fourth quarter. Stockton helped to lead that charge, and Stockton hit the three-pointer to um, eliminate the Houston Rockets. Clyde Drexler was a great scorer in some ways, but in other ways he wasn't. He was not. He got a lot of his buckets initially from being a slasher type player. Open court, he was deadly. Transition, he was deadly. Um, he kind of reminded you a little bit of maybe Julius Irving, but a little bit of a better shooter, just a little bit. But he wasn't a great shooter. Although he did eventually develop into being a respectable outside shooter. Never was he a great shooter, but um, you know what I'm saying? He became a more well rounded player overall. And he was a very versatile player. He routinely led in his prime Portland in scoring, rebounds, steals, and assists. Uh, I believe I believe with blocks, he's top 3 or 4 all time. I believe it's Wade, Jordan, Drexler, and Gervin as the top 4 players with blocks. I think when Clyde Drexler retired in '98, I think he was third in steals at that time. I don't think he ranks that high now. I know he doesn't rank that high now, but he still has to be somewhere in the top 6 or 7 in steals. Um, he was an all-around guy. That's why I say in today's NBA, I believe he'd probably be a triple double, a severe triple double threat. I believe he had 27 or 28 career triple doubles, but that was back in the era where guys weren't really, how can I say this? Guys weren't really padding their numbers to get triple doubles. You know what I'm saying? That wasn't something that was really out there, But you look at his overall career, he played in 1,086 games. He shot 47% from the floor. He shot 32% from three, but that's a little bit misleading because by the let's see, by 94-95, he shot 36% from three that year. His first year with Houston, he shot 36% from three. 96, 33%, 97, 36%. He was about a 79% career foul shooter, and he averaged 20.4 points per game, to go along with 6.1 rebounds, 5.6 assists, and 2 steals per game. His best statistical season might have been 1988-89, when Drexler averaged 27.2 points, 7.9 rebounds, 5.8 assists, and led the league with 2.7 steals per game. Well, actually, he didn't lead the league in steals. That was his highest career average, 2.7. I think John Stockton led the league in steals that year with 2.9. But Clyde Drexler remains a top 50 all-time player, um, and I believe at this point he's still probably would be in most people's eyes the best Portland Trailblazers player. Damian Lillard has been sensational, but I think Damian still has to replicate at least what Clyde did. Clyde was able to make it to 2 NBA Finals, and even though I respect Lillard's mindset, I respect how he plays. Ultimately, he would have to at least replicate some of Clyde's playoff success for me to put him over Clyde as far as number one in Portland, history. Um, I know some people have Bill Walton, I guess, number one. I don't know. I guess you have to put him there in some people's eyes, but I just see Bill Walton's career as being incomplete. You know, um, he did have maybe 3.5 seasons of MVP basketball, but at the same time, I still don't think he was the best player in the league. I think that Kareem was the best center in the league. So I don't know. To me personally, I tend to think some people overrate Bill Walton a little bit. Okay, uh, but that's about it, man. That's pretty much what I got to say about Clyde Drexler, man. He's sort of undervalued today. A lot of people just, I don't know what it is, man. They just, for some reason, think he's just this great athlete and just dunked and didn't have a great game, and they don't really know what the fuck they're talking about. So, tell me what you